Hola, bienvenidos una vez más a este canal de Ecohabitat. En esta sesión estaremos hablando como parte de la serie de Ecología Urbana de un tema súper importante y súper interesante que tiene que ver con el manejo del agua y el paisaje. Ante escenarios del cambio climático, de la elevación del nivel del agua de los mares, el tema de cómo diseñar con la naturaleza y cómo afrontar el reto de manejo del agua es un tema cada vez más importante para las ciudades. En esta sesión estoy muy contento de que nos acompaña un especialista de Holanda, el arquitecto Mikael David, que nos estará hablando de su área de especialidad que tiene que ver con proyectos que ha desarrollado en Holanda con el manejo de agua y manejo de paisaje. Ver la infraestructura urbana como una pieza del paisaje, de la ecología urbana, que una ciudad y un territorio o una región pueden integrar de una manera en armonía con la naturaleza. Y nos va a estar platicando de este tema súper interesante donde vamos a conocer cómo en Holanda están diseñando o codiseñando con la naturaleza y están integrando la ecología, el paisaje, la arquitectura y el urbanismo de una manera multidisciplinaria. Sin lugar a dudas, esta sesión espero que sea muy inspiracional para todos ustedes y que aprendamos a inspirarnos del diseño de la biología, del diseño de la naturaleza, que aprendamos cómo podemos crear o transformar mediante la innovación territorios que puedan ser capaces de mantener una ecología, de crear un ecosistema en armonía. Y si bien se altera el ecosistema, este ecosistema alterado, como lo es Holanda completo, es un ecosistema que también alberga una diversidad de vida biológica en la región. Y bueno, también aprender a pensar cómo el pensamiento de los sistemas vivos debe ser cada vez más pues un común de los profesionistas del siglo XXI y cómo desde el urbanismo, la arquitectura, el territorio, podemos aprender y debemos de responder a este diseño en armonía con la naturaleza. Entonces, no se diga más, vamos a ver algunos videos y unos ejemplos que nos va a estar compartiendo el arquitecto Mikael. Y muchísimas gracias por esta colaboración, conectándonos hasta Holanda. Y bueno, pues ahora sí que no se diga más, los dejo con este video. Si no se han suscrito al canal, los invito a que se suscriban aquí abajo, que le den clic a la campanita para que les advierta cuando subamos nuevo material. Y también que nos dejen sus comentarios, sus preguntas, para seguir abordando temas de este tipo en los siguientes videos. Muchas gracias y bienvenidos. Yo soy su host, Rodrigo Ochoa. Gracias. Hola, buenas tardes o días. Estamos aquí en una sesión más de Ecología Urbana y el día de hoy tengo el gusto de compartir esta charla con Mikael David. Él es nuestro invitado especial en esta sesión. Él es profesor de arquitectura, en estos momentos está como profesor invitado en el TEC de Monterrey y ha sido arquitecto activo en el campo de la arquitectura y el urbanismo, graduado como arquitecto en la Universidad Tecnológica de Delft en Holanda en el 2007. Actualmente trabaja como arquitecto líder en Sitban, Breda y Co. Arquitectos y anteriormente trabajó en varios estudios de diseño en los Países Bajos, entre ellos UN Studio, BHP Royal Haskoning, entre otras como la propia organización. Y es miembro también del Buró de Arquitectura, que es como el Colegio de Arquitectos de Holanda. Se ha registrado en el Kamerban Copenhagen de la Cámara de Comercio de Holanda y tiene su especialidad es arquitectura sostenible e infraestructura urbana. Muchísimas gracias, Mikael, por estar este día con nosotros. Te queremos dar la bienvenida a esta sesión. Y bueno, pues sin más, empezamos con tu presentación para que nos platiques un poquito cómo en Holanda se abordan los temas del manejo del agua en el diseño urbano, en el diseño de paisaje, y cómo la ecología juega un rol importante pues, al momento de hacer todos estos análisis de manejo de territorio e integrar al ser humano con el territorio donde cohabita. Entonces, pues si gustas empezamos con la presentación y al final algunas preguntas. Gracias, Michael.
Es un gusto estar aquí contigo, Rodrigo. No sé si puedo presentar en inglés, si es algo...
Sí, it's okay. Yes, don't worry. And I will put the subtitles in Spanish, don't worry.
Subtitles, okay. So I will give a presentation today about my country. It's how the Dutch work with water. It's actually quite important because we're all talking about climate change, and the Netherlands is fighting against water for many, many decades. So to explain, we are a small country. It's the size of Quintana Roo. We are at the left, we have the North Sea, and at the right, we have a lot of branches of waters that come from the mountains, from Germany, from Italy, from France, and all this water crosses through the Dutch delta. So we are very valuable for water and floodings. So to explain, if you go in this, you see that we call it the país bajos, and that has to do because we are for 1/4 based under the sea level. When there's a lot of water coming from the rivers, you see that these rivers now create floodings, and these floodings create 1/3 of this country that's very vulnerable to rivers. From the other side, we have another flooding risk, and that's 30% that comes from the North Sea. And altogether, that makes almost 60% of our country is really at risk for flooding. Myself, I live in the west, in that part, so I know very well what are the dangers of those areas. I'll show you a little video. And this video shows actually what happens if one of the dikes breaks in our country. It's a simulation where you see on the left the casualties, and on the right you see the total damage in millions of euro. This is a footage that takes place in just a few days, and the proximity of deadly casualties is among 10,000 citizens in just a few days by the breaking of one ocean dike. So you see actually how vulnerable our country is and why we should act. To understand the Netherlands, you have to really go back to understand what is the landscape of the Netherlands. So in Holland, we have 6 types of landscapes. One is the higher sands, is actually the yellow color, what you see on the right. And these sand areas were actually brought by the Ice Age, what they had in the mid-Pleistocene. And that's a period where ice came from Scandinavia and this crushed lands of the Netherlands, and they created what we see here in the middle, what is actually called lateral moraines. Lateral moraines are actually these types of landscapes that we have, rocky from the underground. Another type is a type that came later in the Ice Age. There was not ice what was brought over the Netherlands, but sand. And this sand actually covered a great part of our country. So you see here in this, in the middle one is the sand landscape, and on the right one you see the loose landscape, and that is actually the left one is the lateral moraines where we got higher parts. On the right, you see how sand covered our country, and this created in the south these types of landscapes that can go up to 300 meters high.
One question, Michael. In the previous picture, the dots means the current coastal?
Yeah, exactly. So you see here, this is the coast of the Netherlands.
Today.
Today, exactly, today. That's the dot. So you see actually how in the past there was not all this with water. That came later.
All right.
It came later, and that has to do with the 3 new landscapes that we have. It's the dune landscape, the peat, and the peat is called turba in Spanish, and the sea landscape. And so this is actually what happened. Well, 10,000 years ago, there was not really water. When the Ice Age went away, the waters melted. So the ice melted, and that created a rise in rivers, but also in seas. So you see actually here what happens is that the seawater brings sediments, and the first one would be sand. So it creates a small dune. And then after that, water crushes over because there's ebb and flood, and that leaves sea clay behind. And this sea clay at the end creates peat. So you see actually every time it goes a little bit up, and this is actually how the Netherlands got built through the time. So you see here the dune landscape that we have in the west, and in the north we have also kinds of sand landscapes that are more islands. We have I think 7 islands in the north. This is how you would see the sea landscape, and this is how we perceive the peat. This peat is something that you can use as a fossil to create energy. And the last one is the river landscape. So the river landscape comes from the right and goes actually from here all to the left. And it's actually very interesting because we call it the summer bed, and the summer bed is in the middle where the river brings sediments and creates the first levee. In times that there's floodings, other sediments cross over, and this creates actually the floodplain area, and it brings river clay. This river clay is protected by what we call a winter dike. So this whole package here is the winter bed. And actually you see it like this. So you have here the winter dike, and all this area is at risk of floodings.
All right. Yeah. Yeah, the approach in your country is more to understand where, in which areas the flood will happen and which areas you would like to protect a little bit more, right?
Exactly. So when you know all this mechanism, then you can change the border of the dikes to protect what you want to protect. So you see the development of our country, where at the left there was a lot of swamps, and this is about 5,000 before Christ. Then we created a lot of peat, and at the end there's an interesting part, and that's the part of the poldering. Poldering is actually creating land, and the Netherlands is built of 4,000 polders, creating a huge amount of extra land. So show very quick how this works. So here you see on the left, you see that people started to live in these areas where there's water. The land was made of peat, so they had to grave canals, and these canals made the water lower, but also that the upper part that was of peat oxidated. So what happened, it got a lot of air, and then this peatland got down. So to continue to protect it, they had to build dikes and windmills, and all this to pump up all this water to continue living. So this process continued and continued, the land lowered. So it's actually the Dutch created the lower lands themselves at the beginning. And at a certain moment, they decided to deepen these small water canals, what you will see now.
That's why it's below the sea level, right?
That's why it's below the sea level. So the Dutch people created this. Then you see on the right part, it's actually a continuation on that. There's an epoch in the Middle Ages where a lot of new settlements were created. So energy was needed to heat up the houses. Forests were used for that. And at a certain moment that there was no more wood, the Dutch thought of using peat as a new fossil. So what happens actually, you'll see here, so they started to dig out all this peat. This peat was dried and then shipped to the cities. But that means that a lot of land by this was dug out. After that, cities grew, so we needed new settlements, and then they decided to use these water areas and pump everything out. So they put it a dike, a set of windmills, and they dug everything. resulting in a new landscape. And this landscape is actually touching the green area. And that's quite important because green is sea clay. Sea clay is very, very fertile. What I'll explain later, why this is so important. Okay, so what you see here is the landscape of the peat polder. You see all these small ditches, and how does it work? Well, it's a whole hierarchy of canals, I would say. You first start with a ditch, and the ditch is a very small hole. Brings the water from the very down layer to an upper layer, what we call the watering. That's a broader water canal. This water is transported by windmills or little pumps. You see them here, the windmills. They actually suck the water from one canal to the other. And also with the right is a small pump that does the same. It goes after that by a pumping station. It arrives to a broader water canal. It's called the Peat River. And then it goes actually from very small to bigger waters, pumping every time the water from down to up. And at the end, it arrives to the biggest pumping station that brings it to the river, and the river brings it to the sea. In the past, it was all made by windmills, and then after that, new technologies of pumping station made it possible. The other one, that's the lakebed polder, you can see it because it's all dug out. So we have really broader water canals. So to skip the introduction with what I just showed you, I will go to what happens after. So they created a ring where water is pumped up into this ring canal. So you see here on the left, you see how they did it with windmills. And on the right, you see how by history, pumping station took over. And then it goes to, from the ring canal, it goes to a lock. And then a lock brings lower water up to rivers. And the rivers would bring it to the sea. So this is how this looks like with the locks and the river. As I explained, is that this lakebed polder created something interesting because they touched the sea clay. This is something that in other countries was not the case. So that means that not only dairy, but also flowers and plants, meat, vegetables and fruits, all could be created on the same piece of land. And this resulted that the Netherlands became the second biggest country in export of agricultural products. This is how the Netherlands got really rich in history. It got rich by their own urbanism, I would say, by poldering. And they make a lot of money on that, more than 90 billion of US dollars a year on this. So after that, we had our first Delta Act, and it's in 58. We decided to protect our country in a more sophisticated way, and this to protect the country, but also to have adequate fresh water supply. This is controlled, so there's a commissioner that really checks out the funds and also oversees the whole program. One of the biggest programs that we had is the Zuiderzee Works. It's actually discovered by an engineer called Cornelis Lely, and in 50 years they created 165 hectare of new land. And they did it step by step. So they first started with building a dike. This dike is what you see here. This dike is huge. It's 30 kilometers long. Built in 1930. So that's really incredible how they did it in that time. And I will show you in a small footage. I don't know, can you hear the video or is it?
Not the video, but...
Okay, so I will share it again and then put my...
Work began carefully. Nobody had ever built anything in the water on such a scale before. So first they built a smaller dike from the mainland to this small island over here. Here they gained some useful expertise for the real project. and in 1927 the work on the Afsluitdijk began in 4 locations. They began on either side where the dike was supposed to be connected. They also built 2 islands in the middle of the Southern Sea where the dikes were supposed to cross, and started construction on both these 2 locations as well. They built 2 islands in the middle of the sea to build a giant dike in the middle of the water. Tens of thousands of workers flocked from across the country to work on this marvel of engineering. First, the Dutch had to build a sturdy foundation. Ships came day in, day out, dropping millions of cubics of meters of materials into the sea. On the inland side, heavy stones were deposited. On the seaside, boulder clay was dropped into the sea. They were kept in place with brushwood mattresses, which in turn were held down by boulders and old concrete. Then till was collected from the sea bottom and deposited upon its foundation. Finally, the dike was finished by raising it above sea level with sand and clay. To make sure the dike was sturdy and wasn't blown away by the wind, grass was planted on top of it. And so the dike closed on May 28, 1932.
So they did this actually for 2 reasons. There was a great flood in 1916 where lots of people died. And during the First World War, there was also a lot of food shortage. So they thought that if we create new land and we adapt it to agriculture, there will be a lot of food for the whole country in the next war. So I will show you how these countries or these lands were built by showing you a next video.
Very interesting, thank you.
The process of land reclamation in the Netherlands is mainly done through...
Is there any questions so far?
No, it's okay, thank you.
Okay.
poldering. It is the process of draining water from a lake or by placing dikes around an area of water and then draining it until you are left with fertile land. And this is what Lely proposed. Build a dike to stop the seawater, then build smaller dikes inside this newly formed lake, and then one by one drain the water. This land was rich in clay, could be settled and could be farmed, which in turn meant that the Dutch government could tax these activities and make a lot of money. To test poldering in the Southern Sea itself, they decided to first make a small test polder, only 400 square meters. It took about a year and it tested the effects drainage would have on the soil of the Southern Sea and how to best configure the new polders. They first built 18 kilometers of dike around the area and then proceeded to pump it dry. It was performed by using a variation of the Archimedes screw and a pumping station or a mill. To make the land suitable for agriculture, a network of ditches were dug into the polder to channel water towards the pumping station. The resulting dehydration caused the seabed to sink by over a meter in some places. Once the ground was settled, the ditches were replaced with underground drainage tubes. And while the polder was now dry, it couldn't be settled yet. The ground was still far too unstable, so they cultivated the land by throwing reed seeds out of airplanes. This sturdy plant helped evaporate the water and bring air into the soil, thereby solidifying the land. Then all the fields of reed were burned and replaced with rapeseed. It's also around this time that they built basic infrastructure such as roads, and when winter turned into spring, the newborn polder would slowly turn into a sea of yellow. These yellow plants were then replaced with various grains such as rye, wheat, barley and oats. This process took years, and in the end the soil was rich enough to allow the planting of other crops, while roads and houses were being built for the future settlers and farmers. Polders were divided in plots of 50 acres. The best land is used for vegetables, the next best for rye and other grains, and the worst land is forested. Each plot was paved with a road in front of it and a canal in the back to make it accessible by both land and water. While this test polder was being built, the engineers didn't simply wait and see. They decided to continue with poldering other parts of the IJsselmeer and would know if there was any trouble ahead by looking at the pilot polder's progress. They started with the Wieringermeer. This area that would eventually encompass this polder already included several villages. This presented a new problem for the Dutch government. Who did this new land belong to? The Southern Sea was divided among the mainland municipalities. This is okay for seawater, but now it is going to be turned into land, splitting up the responsibility among several government bodies. So it was decided that this land would be a public body, which meant there was a complicated arrangement where a government body was in charge of working on the polder, and a committee was responsible for public governance. As the polder became more populated, its people demanded representation in politics, and so it became its own municipality on July 1st, 1941. The next polder is the Noordoostpolder or the Northeast Polder. Here too, they first built dikes around the area they wanted to lay dry and then pump out all the water, cultivate with simple seeds to strengthen the ground, then continue with different plants until you can build roads and farms and eventually begin cultivating the land. You see, the polder is connected to the land, but the polder is located a few meters lower than the mainland. So groundwater would flow from the mainland into the polder, and then from the polder it would be drained into the Southern Sea. This meant that the mainland soil was now deprived of water and far less fertile. So to solve this problem for the next polder, they left a string of water surrounding the new polder. This new polder was called Flevoland, which was named after the Roman name for an ancient lake in that area. It roughly means land of the stream. But because this polder was surrounded by water, they needed a much longer dike. A 90-kilometer long dike was constructed for the eastern section of Flevoland. Work began in 1951, but 2 years later, a massive flood hit the south of the Netherlands, a region which was unprotected from modern dikes. This was the largest natural disaster to strike the Netherlands in its entire history. This event created tens of thousands of refugees, and construction on Flevoland halted until they could get the south up and running again. And these refugees needed a place to stay. Many of them were farmers, and many were given plots of land in the new polder. And when the south was finally safe again, many opted to stay in the new polder. But Flevoland wasn't ready yet. Work on the polder soon continued again, and it was finished in 1957. And it was decided to build a city, which would function as the regional commercial and managerial capital for Flevoland and the Northeast Polder. This city would be called Lelystad, after the man who laid out the plans for this prestigious project. In 1959, the southern Flevoland polder began construction and was finished in 1968, taking longer because they only used a single pump to drain out the water. Due to its proximity to Amsterdam and the Amsterdam housing shortage at the time, Flevoland would get a second city to relieve tensions from the capital. Thanks to motorized farming equipment and artificial fertilizer, farming had become a lot less valuable by that time, so much of Flevoland was turned into housing and nature preserves. Construction on Flevoland officially finished in 1984, when the crucial urban areas were finished. 4 years later, the polder would become their own province rather than being split up between the existing ones, adding the 12th province of Flevoland to the Netherlands.
So you see actually how the Dutch created their own land. It was a process where at first it was a selection of inhabitants. You had to be religion, you had to be married, Dutch, not more than 55 years, and also a well education. If you had all this, you could live in this new land. So in the video, you saw what happened in the south of Holland in 1953. We had almost 2,000 death casualties. So after that, they decided to build the Delta Act, and the Delta Act consisted of 14 different water preventions. The first was done in places where there was not a lot of water stream. So they created small islands, and then with cable cars start dropping rocks, and after that sand. This resulted in these kind of dikes that we have. The other one was created in places where there was more streaming of the sea. So they made hollowed concrete blocks, they chained them up together, and then after that they filled them up with sand, covered it up with gravel and sand, created these types of landscape over the years. But there was then some protest of the left-wing young politician that said we are now blocking the sea from the inner waters, so sweet and salt waters don't have a connection, meaning that a lot of fauna were eliminated during the years. So they started to create search barriers, and search barriers are passages where we have a lock, and this lock can go up and down and protect against floodings. So this is the first one, the Herringvliet Dam. And after that, they went even more crazy. They created the Oosterscheldekering, and it's one of the most incredible search barriers in the world. They first made 2 islands where they constructed these 65 pillars of a height of almost 40 meters. And they shipped them from this island on location. They dropped them carefully, and then they created locks in between. Those locks can go down. I think that went 27 times since the Oosterscheldekering was built. 27 times the locks protected the country against flooding. But we had then another challenge, because Rotterdam is one of the biggest ports in the world. There's a lot of passage of ships. So these ships had to go from rivers underneath bridges, and also these search barriers. So they created these types of search barriers that could go vertically down and protect when there's floodings. One of the most remarkable is this one, the Maaslandkering. This is it actually has 2 arms that are circulating around a cylinder of 10 meters. One of these, so what you see actually here, this size is the height of the Eiffel Tower, to give you an impression, 200 meters wide. And these are so huge, they're 20 meters high, and this one closed 2 times since it was built. The last time was in 2018. So after that, in 2008, the Dutch started to rethink their flood protection, and they came up with a new act in 2012. And this act is very important for the urbanization of the Netherlands, because it brought attention to a spatial adaptation. And what you see here is that the Dutch started to have a lot of programs, new programs, and most of them are concentrated right here in the river areas. So we started to accept water, not treat it as an enemy, but treat it more as a friend and enjoy the water. The ambition of this Delta program is actually to have a lower risk in death casualties. It's a program that is invented till 2015, and after that we will see what will happen. I'll show you 2 or 3 projects that are, okay. Yes?
Yeah, that's okay.
I will show you 2 or 3 projects to see the ambition of this Delta program. So this one is a part of the Afsluitdijk that we just showed before. And here they created, they called it a fish migration river. They created a passage for fish that go from salt to sweet, that they can swim against the current on their own. So I'll show you a small video how this works.
The Afsluitdijk. At a point where the IJsselmeer, once the Zuiderzee, meets the Waddenzee, there was once an estuary. Fresh water and salt water mingled freely. Now this dike, 20 miles long, keeps out the sea. It has locks at 2 points where only water and shipping can pass through. Many fish species need fresh water to breed or grow up in. But since the Afsluitdijk was built, their path is blocked and they can no longer reach their breeding grounds. At low tide, excess water from the IJsselmeer gushes into the Waddenzee. The fish are drawn to the fresh water and try to swim in against the current. They have little chance against the flow, so their migration route is blocked. And that is why the fish migration river has been invented. Thanks to this new system, large numbers of fish can safely reach the IJsselmeer whenever they want. Weak swimmers among the fish hitch a ride on the inward flow when it's high tide in the Waddenzee. When it's low tide in the Waddenzee, fresh water flows out. The freshwater current from the fish migration river attracts the fish to the entrance. Strong swimmers can easily swim against the flow. At the entrance, there is an island where various birds, such as plovers and terns, can breed in peace. Via an opening, the fish can pass through the Afsluitdijk. This passage has a main stream and a secondary stream. Gates have been installed in both the openings. These are used to regulate the current speed and the amount of salt water that enters. Vertical bulkheads have been placed in the secondary stream, reducing the current speed there. This allows weaker swimmers to pass through at their own pace. The passage can be closed off with a storm surge barrier. This guarantees safety against flooding. The passing fish can be seen through a riverside viewing window, and in a specially modified bunker, you can view the information about the fish migrations and the migratory species. The world of salt and fresh water can be experienced here. As the fish move further into the IJsselmeer, the water gradually becomes fresher. In the fluctuating transition zone between salt and fresh water, a dynamic area of brackish water is created. Here the fish have time to adapt, and new vegetation can grow. To create the ideal length of about 3 miles, the middle section has an array of groins made of wooden posts. Here you can also find an art project consisting of about 300 fish silhouettes that turn with the tide. The fish now continue along their route to the IJsselmeer and further upstream. There they will develop or breed. To prevent salt water flowing into the IJsselmeer, the fish migration river can be closed off at the end with a lock. A large part of this remarkable new nature reserve will soon be open to visitors, and people will be able to explore it via meandering footpaths. There is also a jetty to allow access to the fish migration river by boat.
So this is actually a perfect project of building with nature, where all this has been done to preserve the ecology.
Yeah, it's amazing that the infrastructure is to focus on taking care of the nature and how the nature works. So it's
Exactly.
a very nice project, very interesting. Very
So
few places in the world we found this.
Well, we think that if this doesn't happen, then the whole ecology furthermore will collapse in the following year. So other species will disappear, and we all need them to have a good ecology.
Wow, great.
So let me see the other project I would like to show very short. So this one is it's a sea dike. You see here the dots here. It's actually crossing the historical city of Katwijk. So they decided to protect Katwijk again, and they created another dike. And this dike, they tried to do it more with building with nature and integrate landscape, architecture, engineering, and the water protection together. So there was a lot of ships that took out sand here in the ocean, approximately 2.5 million cube of sand. And they extended the coast with 100 meters. So here you see how it was before. And so we have here the boulevard, then 60 meters of dunes, a beach banquet, 60 meters of beach, and then the sea. So what did they do? They turned out the whole landscape. They said, okay, let's make a dike. Let's push on the whole beach 100 meters to the left, create dunes that would protect the dike. And then in between, let's put all the cars that we have in this whole area on the ground. So this is the building of a 500-meter garage. And you see here how they started to create these sea dikes.
Can you go to the previous one?
This one?
Yeah, so is this piece, right?
Sorry?
Is this area, right, in the picture? the project
Yes.
is this area.
So this is the new garage that is the pink color, 500 meters, and then this is the new dike that they made, and that would attach here. It would continue in the dunes. And all this is actually a dune recovery, we would say, where they made a landscape area out of it. And this is really fantastic how they did this. I think it was the best project of the Netherlands 2 years ago. So you see here the building of the garage, and on the right you already see the dike is covered by sand. This is how it looks like. You say, okay, it's just a dune area, but for example, the entrance of the garage are part of the landscape. So the landscape is very dominant. You see how they worked between what's functional, what is aesthetic, and you don't even perceive the cars. It's always super hidden, and the ecology is the guiding stream in this project. People you see here on the left, you see so all this part here, this was water before. This is this 100 meter what they pushed to the left. So we have some architectural elements, the access underground. This is how it looks like. Another project I will explain very short is very interesting. It's a new development. It's called the Sun Motor, and it's actually an experiment how we can protect the coastline by new type of management. So you have to imagine that every 5 years, a lot of trucks full of sand have to come and they have to deposit along the coast. So let me go back. They deposit a lot of sand here, and that is a damage to the ecology, because there's also a lot of species living there, and every 5 years new sand is dropped. So they decided to do something different. They studied how they could use nature to protect the Dutch coast. So they pumped out 21 million cube of sand. That is 10 times much as the previous project. So this is how it looks like in 2016. And they believe that by the force of wind and water and current, all this sand will be transported over the coastline. So this will be a period of 20 years, but then we don't need to bring trucks and destroy our own ecology. This will be made by nature.
Little by little.
Little by little, yeah. It's nature will do the rest. So I would like also to show you 2 projects. Like I'm working myself as an architect, but I'm more into the infrastructure world, where landscape and infrastructure and architecture are all combined. So this is a project, a competition we won. It's a road that has to pass here over a water canal. And we decided that this whole passage should be sustainable on itself. So actually what we did, we created here an electricity pond where we have floatable sun panels, and they capture all the electricity what's needed to light up this whole ring road. We also thought that if there's a lot of cars going to ride on this path, we need to filter all the carbon what falls on the asphalt. We need to filter that. So we created here underneath the bridge, we created a small pond where we have special plants that treat the water. So everything what falls down from the road enters first here, and then is filtered and goes back as clean water into the river. This is how it looks like with the floating sun panels. Here in reality, how we made them float. And for the architecture, well, the client wanted just a simple bridge that you see everywhere. And we thought that by separating everything, we could create a more vivid underground layer. So this is how it got built, and you see here the pond, but it's full of we call them halophyte plants. So all this dust that comes from cars first goes down, gets filtered here, and then goes into the river. And it creates also a more vivid place, so people go here to sit around and also see how the boat passes. It's a bridge that can open. So here it goes. Here you see how it's opened. And well, just to show you very quick the architecture part, we tried to solve everything that, for example, you see here, this part integrates well. And as a landscape design, we created here a lot of benches where people can see how this spectacle is happening. Also, we tried to design the bridge conform the user. So, for example, on this side, we had a special wooden armature where people can lean over, and we created here, for example, a platform where the user can see the peat landscape. It's all really built as a lookout. So at night also, no more high. Let's say we try to have it as sober as possible, and inviting to not disturb the ecology. Another project is a bridge we also made into. It's a bit of, I think in budget, maybe 2 or 3 million euro, and this actually made a connection for this park here. This park is maybe 100 million. It's a park that is used when there's floodings. So we try to bring all this water from floodings into this park. Where in the summer, you don't have lots of water, and there is another landscape, and then in the winter, it gets flooded, and then you will see that it gets a total other atmosphere. So we created a bridge that has to connect both, and we really looked at the landscape. So we said, okay, there are two connections, a straight line and a curved, and then we created our bridge out of that. In Sky, we were inspired by Mother Nature also. This is a famous Dutch painting, and we thought, okay, we're going to use these kind of trees, but in a different way. These trees should capture energy. This energy should light up the whole passage. So these trees, we translated them in sticks with a solar panel on top. And at night, this is how it looks at night. So the solar panels on top, they provide this whole passage and energy. And we also try to have the bridge made of corten steel, and a lot of little tricks to have 30% less of material. So this is actually how we work, architect, landscapes, ecologists, all together to create these types of projects. So this is, in short, my presentation.
Very good. Thank you, Michael. Thank you very much. It's very interesting. And from the perspective of the urban ecology, all these pieces of infrastructure is very interesting to see how in Netherlands they try to create a dialogue between nature, people, the ecosystem, and also the landscape. No, the landscape is a very important aspect in Netherlands. No? So, what you can tell us about understanding the territory like that? I mean, this is something that in Netherlands is very advanced, and you start to thinking about as a living system, and try to understand that the humans, we can transform the Earth, the planet, is kind of terraforming the planet in a way, but doing in a very responsible way. And with this kind of project that you show us, for example, the one with the fish, they understand that there is an impact in all the infrastructure, and you have to understand the living system that are already there. So what you can tell us a little bit more about this topic?
Well, as I explained, is that the Netherlands, we are a country that is surviving since the very start. So we created this mentality that we need to take care of what we have, otherwise we will not exist. So that I think this mentality helped us a lot during time. So now also the government, and that's a very key player in that, understood that if the Netherlands want to continue being wealthy and also have their citizens happy, they need to create those types of projects. It's thinking not only now, but thinking in what happens in 100 years. How are we going to be? And the beautiful part of it is these are projects that also generate money. I mean, what I showed you about the export of agriculture, it's so much money involved that it's interesting to have those projects. To I mean, we also have projects where we build bridges only for animals to cross over from one side to the others, and it's all done to have this ecology in balance. Because otherwise, the Netherlands will maybe not exist, be damaged, and it also takes a lot of money. We also do a lot of those projects because of climate change. So the government says we don't want cars. We need to push people to use infrastructure for cycling. So there's a lot of bridges that are created. And these bridges take part of the landscape. We don't have engineers that do that. It's tenders that are done by multiple people. That's so interesting because someone from the ecology part can have sometimes another vision and then creates these amazing types of design. So I would say it's not as we had before, architect, landscape. It's all together. It's one type of product, and that's why
multidisciplinarity, no?
Exactly. And urbanism is, and ecology and urbanism is a very important key player in this, especially with the change of climate.
Exactly. Yes, and also I understand the Netherlands teach us something to the rest of the world. Meanwhile, many cities try to fight against water. The Netherlands understand how to cooperate with water and treat water not as an enemy, as you say, or not as something that you have to fight against, rather to work with. So from many years ago, you begin a little bit to learn, no, like a kid, no, a child who tried to learn how to play with water, but now you become the experts in the world in the way to manage water and understand how to deal with these floating issues. And right now, with climate change and sea levels rising, now this is very important for other cities.
Exactly. For other countries, cities, it's important. We found out that by playing with water, it created new landscapes. It created new landscapes for nature, new species were born. Also, other places of ecotourism. So we really saw the advantage out of it, and we thought, okay, let's not fight it because it's every time getting more and more. But let's find ways on inviting water and then see how it happens, and it's working quite good.
And then new living systems arrive to settle there, and you create a whole new ecology.
Exactly. So the ecology is one of the most important things for this new Delta Act, and that's why it gets more and more important, and also for your courses. Building with nature is, I mean, it's a name, but it can be resilient infrastructure, whatever you want to call it. But I also see this as a future. I started as an architect, and I'm much more involved in building with nature projects.
Very interesting. So my final question is related with climate change. With the new studies, how much % of the territory in Netherlands is already kind of protected from the sea level rise? and which other part of the country you still need doing more projects for the future? Do you have an idea about that?
Everything is protected. Everything is protected. It's so well protected that all the engineers they measure every time the dikes. There's so much going on. But the projects continue now more into the rivers, because as climate change, more water comes actually from the mountains of Italy, France, and Germany, and they causes a lot of floodings. So, for example, farmers can't cultivate anymore because there are floodings, and it costs so much money. So we have, well, let me see, I don't know if let me go back very quick to, let me share my screen again.
Yep.
So you see here, all these dots are special programs. There are so many, there are hundreds of programs, special programs to reinforce dike, to give more space to rivers. It continues. So you see that the dots are more concentrated now in floodplains, and not so much in coastal developments, because we already protected quite well the coast at this moment.
All right. Okay. Very good. Very interesting talk. Thank you very much to join us. I appreciate a lot all the info and all the pictures and videos that you share with us. And we are in contact, and have a nice trip back to Netherlands. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And if you need any other information during the course, or let me know. I mean, this is just a part of all the projects we've done, and there's so much more to tell. But very good luck. But,
thank you very much.